pro-Kamala billionaire Mark Cuban continues to be excellent out advocating on behalf of Harris's campaign. And he appeared on CNBC. We've talked about, I can't remember if it was on the bonus show for everyone, how Joe Kernan, one of the CNBC hosts, is sort of more MAGA aligned. And then Andrew Ross Sorkin has become pretty outspokenly, in my world, a little bit more, right? I don't want to throw a label that maybe he doesn't associate with, but a little bit more on our side of things. And he brought up a really good point with Mark Cuban. Then Joe Kernan got a little triggered. He was the odd man out in this discussion, and I want to play that for you.
You know, one of the critiques, obviously, of former President Trump is around tariffs. And yet it's not clear that unto itself is landing, if you will.
No, it's not.
I wonder why. I asked because, by the way, if you remember, even last week, President Trump was out there saying that, you know, he had killed deer from going to Mexico, which, you know, was just not even true. It was just
he lied.
It was completely like factually untrue.
That's who he is.
No, and yet that does. The question is, why doesn't that land?
Because they're so used to it. You know, he's Pinocchio and his nose is so long it looks like a road. It doesn't matter. No one pays attention to what he actually says. What actually happens, Andrew, he says something and then Joe comes in and explains what he really means. He never says what he really means, and it's unfortunate with the tariffs. That's part of what I was doing in Phoenix.
You're talking about me again. You're out on the campaign trail. I'm not. I mean,
no, I know.
I have to be here because we book you and let you talk for a half hour without anyone, you know, opposed to you.
No,
so
Joe, come on,
into that
oppose
position,
me. Joe, oppose me.
Which I wish I
want. I will hit you with facts every day.
I'm not out campaigning. I'm not a surrogate. I don't know who I'm voting for, Mark. So, you know.
Good. No, Joe, you know what? If you don't know who you're voting for, that's a great thing. I think that's beautiful.
There
I don't
you
know
go.
that.
Good. Thanks. I mean, Mark, we let you go on.
Joe. First of all, can we stop with this? This whole, I can demonstrate how much of a special snowflake I am by pretending like I don't have a political view, but you talk about politics constantly? No. I totally understand, to be clear, because that sounded like I was directing it to certain people. If you're just out living your life and you happen not to be political, I would encourage you to, but that's not who I'm talking about. I'm talking about people like Joe Kernan. He supports Trump. He's going to vote for Trump. Okay, you can tell. Who then try to bolster their credibility by saying, I don't even know who I'm voting for. Well, gosh, you don't know who you're voting for? I don't want to listen to you for political analysis or for economic analysis or for, I don't know, personal financial advice. Well, what does Joe Kernan do on CNBC? I'm not exactly sure. Whatever you're doing, I'm not buying it. Joe, whatever you're selling. And it's not cool or special or yummy or sexy to admit you haven't even given the thought necessary as someone who thinks about this stuff all the time, contrary to people who just haven't yet given the thought to it, which I respect people. But instead with Joe Kernan and saying, to something that's so important, you haven't even decided why. What are you waiting for? Trump's going to roll out a new plan. He's going to say no tax on another thing, as he keeps doing, and that's going to make the difference for you. So that was strange, but also brilliant point from Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban is explaining, I think, one of the most consequential reasons Donald Trump gets away with what he does, which is that the media jumps in the term I think Aaron Rupar popularized was sane washes what he's saying, or goes, I think he meant this or that. And actually, while we're talking about this, before getting to another clip from that same CNBC appearance, let me pull up, what could I find? Tim Scott, I think it was. Tim Scott abstract. And this was Tim Scott being asked about Trump's tariff proposals. And instead of saying, yeah, those are great, he had to say, well, I think Trump sort of doesn't mean what he's saying.
people working paycheck to
Are you a
paycheck.
free trader, Senator? Do you
Absolutely,
agree, you
yeah.
agree with all the tariffs? Do you think John Deere 200%?
Listen,
do you think companies that make stuff here should be a 15% tax? That's industrial policy, isn't it?
I believe that President Trump oftentimes talks in the abstract.
Okay.
Number one. Number two, I do believe that we have the final.
So what do we?
Really? How is you don't understand the term abstract, or you're making a crazy use of it. If you're saying someone citing a specific tariff percentage is abstract. No, he means though 200% abstractly. How do I even do that in my head? So then what is it? Or he'll blatantly lie. Kamala Harris, I can't even, Kamala Harris was helped out by 60 Minutes because they edited her interview, and so they should have their license revoked. We should have the government go after them. And they blatantly, worked to help her, and it was a conspiracy. Lie. But then a lot of folks in the media, especially right-wing media, but also your sort of like centrist media, will go, okay, maybe I don't think BS should be taken off the air. But I think what Trump's getting at is that so many people don't trust the media enough, right? And that's something we should address. I think he's really looking out for the working class person who hasn't or who isn't experiencing the trust and the credible information delivered to them that they should. I think that's what really Trump means when he says the press are criminals, is that we should do better to be fact-based, right? Isn't that? No, he's saying they're criminals because he doesn't like when they when they report on things that are negative about him. And that's not someone who cares about freedom of the press or our Constitution. But that's the explaining away that people like Joe Kernan, people like Tim Scott, and the folks over at Fox News, and let's be honest, not to name any more names, but other people in the media who aren't overtly right-wing, they do it a lot. And we shouldn't, because you never do that with Kamala Harris. You never go, oh, that one answer that MAGA's making fun of, well, what she meant is actually spectacular, because you just go, oh, there's a lot of concern. Everyone's concerned about how that answer wasn't good enough. The double standards are crazy. At another moment, this took place.
Both sides, I can never remember election where both sides fall back on either, oh yeah, they don't really mean that, or, well, there's going to be gridlock, so none of that stuff's really going to happen.
What did I say that had to do with either of those things? I told you specifically.
This is an election where both sides have to constantly distance themselves from they still support the candidate, but they distance themselves from certain parts of the candidate's platform.
Well, yeah, you don't have to agree with everything from any candidate.
It's just, I've never seen an election where both sides.
But Joe, what I'm talking, let's go back to what I was talking about. Let's go back to what I was talking about. You didn't address that at all.
You took my filibuster question to healthcare. So I don't, that's your own thing.
Well, no, you asked me specifically, what are the things about her that I agree with, that I support? I told you I didn't support the filibuster. I was asking what other things that she's proposed in the past would cause you to campaign against her if she went through with it. Yeah, I mean, look, what she did 4 years ago, just like Donald Trump and the oil thing. I mean, there's lots of things, the candidates change over a period of years. That's one of the great things about Kamala Harris. She's not an ideologue. Okay. She is open-minded. That's why she's changed. Donald Trump thinks he knows everything. He doesn't change.
That's an interesting point, too. I feel like some people ignore or think it's politically disadvantageous to address, was the next word that I merged with it, the shifts in Vice President Harris's policy views. She definitely ran way more to the left in her 2020 presidential campaign. But I agree with Mark Cuban that in a sense, as long as she explains how that doesn't represent some fundamental change in her values, or that she won't do things that she promised not to, because that's actually what she secretly wants to do, but she's lying now, and explains sort of how that transition happened, then in a sense, you admire that, number one, she's willing to, as she gets more information about a subject, adjust accordingly. Trump keeps being told that tariffs aren't attacks on a foreign country's government, but he keeps repeating it. So that's an example of him, because he's stubborn and an egomaniac, not wanting to just, upon stumbling across new information, change what he says about tariffs, whereas she clearly has. And or on some of them, she realizes her job as president would be to represent all of America, all Americans, and thus some positions have to be moderated to both win and to be representing the American people properly. And I don't see any problem with that, especially because these aren't fundamental value, basic principles like Trump. Trump, if he started going, well, I'll accept this election now, his violation of his dedication to our democratic process before was such that we learned about a fundamental principle that regardless of what he says now, regardless of what he promises to do in terms of policy, we've learned enough about his character and his constitutional principles or lack thereof that we don't want to give him another shot. So really interesting to hear there from Mark Cuban. And Joe Kernan is a new character on this show in terms of us talking about him. But I like his, and by like, I mean I like talking about it and I get irritated. That's kind of weird. But he represents a lot of people, I think, in sort of doing I don't know. I'm just saying. Hey, I'm just saying. I don't know who I'm going to vote for. But I don't know about any of the stuff you're saying. I'm just saying. But what he's saying, or the question he's asking, is so obviously in furtherance of, at least, if nothing else, a distorted MAGA narrative. Let me know what you thought in the comments. If you want to, you're thinking, oh no, I've watched all of I've watched all of Luke's. That was so weird. I've watched all of Luke's recent videos and I need more content. You can get it by clicking the join button below.